Okay, so I'm assuming I can start, Sagar. Don't know if you can hear me. Am I audible? Can someone confirm, please?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, awesome. Right, so we'll begin then without further ado. Welcome and a very good evening to all of you present here. You might have seen the posters with the title Research, Writing and Science, but then I thought I'll split it up into two parts, that is research and writing in science. So what we'll do is in the first half of this talk today, we will look at what exactly is research. And in the second half, we're going to look at what is writing and, when you're writing a paper or anything of that sort, what should you have in it? Right, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Vikranth, and I'm currently a second-year master's in physics student at St. Joseph's College in Bangalore. And I'm also the head of academic wing at Nakshatra Sciences and Collaborative Research. Okay, without further ado, let's begin. Right. So the very first question is, what is research? Uh, is my screen visible to all of you, or is there a lag of some sort? Can you see the definition page?
I think the slides are not changing. No, it's not changing. You have to reshare.
Okay, I'll have to reshare. Yeah, I was expecting that would happen. Let me know once you can see my screen again. That is the title page. I'm really sorry. I think my internet's quite bad. Can one of you confirm if you can see the screen?
It's still loading for me. So.
It's
okay.
still showing start station.
Okay. Then give me just a second. All right. While I get back, how many of you have already done a certain amount of research? Let me start off with that, right? Be it your undergraduate thesis or term paper, however you would like to call it, or if you have shown interest in something. How many of you have done that before?
Should we raise our hands or something?
Yeah, I mean, you can unmute and talk. Okay, I see Sagar has raised his hand. Okay. I see Miria has also raised hand. Hardik. That's nice. That's nice to see that. I see 5 hands raised now. Okay, Media, can you tell us a little bit about what you learned out of what research is? Just to set a.
So research is like it's working on a particular topic, not just field, but maybe the topic within the field. So going into depth. So it might be a simple topic also, but
Right.
if you can go into depth into that, like touch all the aspects of what that that single topic has to offer, and maybe if it has something to deal with mathematics, or I mean, like it can prove it with mathematical equations, or support it with all the like formulas, or or maybe something that has to do with computational part of it. So what each, I mean, it depends on the field, the topic that you've taken. Maybe some are very theoretical based, so you don't have to do any of those. Just read papers, articles. Maybe it might be just talks by people that you hear. So various sources. You take that up and then.
That's nice. That's nice. Thank you very much for that. Okay, I hope my screen is visible now. I changed my internet.
Yes.
And yeah, I'll also begin. So the most obvious question is, what exactly is research? right? So you can get several definitions from several places. I picked two of them. The first one being from the Code of Federal Regulations, that happened to be some sort of a governmental website, where they say that research is a systematic investigation designed to develop, contribute generalizable knowledge. And the most obvious place that all of us would refer to is Wikipedia, which says that it's a creative and systematic work undertaken to increase the stock of knowledge. Now, one thing that is common out of these two definitions is the word systematic, right? So what you get out of that is whatever so-called research that you do is some sort of a systematic set of rules that you follow in order to do something, right? And that something happens to be increasing your knowledge, or sort of contributing to general science, or not just science. I mean, any subject that you pick up, it's a systematic way of working via a set of protocols, following a certain convention just for the sake of simplicity, and everyone around the world can get it. Stuff like that, right? So that is what is research. And you know everything you find on Wikipedia is not called research. I mean, just reading a Wikipedia page cannot be counted as research, because a Wikipedia page happens to be a summarized version of work that has been done before, right? So hence the meme that you can see on the right hand side, right? But why does one perform research, right? I mean, why do you want to go out of your way to learn something new, or pick up a problem? And why would you want to do that in the first place? What you're already getting access to all these textbooks that you get in school and college. There's several printed books and all of that. So why would you want to do something new, right? So this is why I would like to call these the glorious purposes, right? The first one is exploration, which means you sort of try to understand what the problem is. I mean, the stuff that we have right now is not complete, right? Pick it be any subject. Whatever we have right now is incomplete. There's always more to it. There's always more understanding that can be achieved, right? So that's one. And then the description, right? What is happening out there, right? How is it happening? For example, if I see a meteor fall to the earth, how is that happening? Why is it happening? All of that comes under exploration and description, right? And of course, the last one is explanation, where you explain the phenomena, which talks about the why that wasn't covered in exploration and description, right? Why does the meteor have to fall? Why does the apple fall to the ground, right? Does the moon also fall to the earth, right? These are the questions that Isaac Newton asked when he was learning about gravity, the mathematical structure of gravity, and so on and so forth. So these I call them the glorious purposes, which is to explore, to describe, and to explain something that is incomplete in some sense in the field of study that you are in, right? But then there are several types of research, right? There are several types of research that one can get into, and one of you had already mentioned a little about that. I would call this the divergence, wherein it's like your research is broadly divided into two parts, which is basic research and applied research, right? You can already see on the screen the differences between the two, so I'll just try to summarize that for you. Basic research is an original investigation wherein you make your own problem and then you try to solve that problem and see if the solution actually exists or not. Even if the solution doesn't exist, that also counts to something, because the problem that you had might have been a relevant problem, right? You don't know the solution to that problem unless you actually sit and solve it. And these kind of problems don't have any commercial benefit. For example, the best example perhaps is something like string theory or quantum field theory from physics, right? They don't have any commercial benefit directly. I mean, you can't make aeroplanes out of string theory, right? So it doesn't affect your day-to-day life. And but still people do this research because uh, those people that are into basic research are more curious about how things work, right? They're more into exploration and explanation in the glorious purposes that I talked about, right? And the other side of it, which is of course the contrast, which has commercial applications or benefits, is applied research. And this is where your almost all of the current sciences come in, be it chemistry, material sciences, biotechnology, computational physics or computational sciences, aerospace engineering, and all of that, right? All of those fall under the category of applied research, where you already use something that has been well established before, right? So for example, if I'm building an aeroplane, I use something called fluid dynamics or aerodynamics to figure out which is the best design for my aeroplane, right? So the part where I'm using fluid mechanics, that fluid mechanics was a part of basic research, which I'm applying into my aeroplane business, right? And I can build aeroplanes, and therefore you have commercial benefits or industrial applications, right? You build thin films in physics, which find their applications in solar cells. So you can find more efficient ways of converting the sun's light into usable electricity, and so on and so forth. And of course, when you do this, you end up discovering something new, right? Sometimes you explain phenomena, or you see phenomena that are not seen before. And the best example for this, now I'm a physics person, so most of my examples would be physics based. Please feel free to ask me if you don't understand as to what that is. So applied research is the best example that I can think of at the moment is the structure of hydrogen. Right? There was only a certain level of understanding about the structure of hydrogen, but then when they did experiments, they found more structure to it, something that wasn't explained by theory. So they had to change the theory or modify the theory to explain this new thing, right? Stuff like that, and all of that falls under applied research. Moving on, how do you go about doing research, right? I mean, there's like uh, computational stuff. There's stuff where you do a lot of data analysis. There's stuff where you just ask people questions, and so on and so forth. So you can split those as qualitative and quantitative types of methods, right? So I'll talk about the qualitative method first, where you have open-ended questions, right? The most important thing is that you have open-ended questions. The questions that you ask, you may not get a definitive answer to them, right? And the data that you get is non-numerical, which means if your friends have already asked you to fill up some sort of a survey or a demographic survey or something like that, all of those come under qualitative analysis or qualitative research, where you ask people about their opinions, or you have a sample space, and that sample space happens to be a human population usually, right? So that kind of research is qualitative research, and the subjects that apply this method is the social sciences, psychology, and philosophy, right? What do you think about this particular phenomena? Or in psychology, how does this particular scenario or circumstance affect you psychologically? Something like that, right? Or in social sciences, maybe how was the German population affected during World War II or something like that, right? These are all qualitative methods where you ask people for their opinions, and then you have a hypothesis with you, and then you try to work on that and see what results you get out of it, which again leads us to the fact that it's going to be an open-ended question. You still have something more to discover uh, going forth. And the next, as I said, is quantitative, where you have numerical data and you do a certain amount of data analysis, right? You use your computational softwares like Python, Fortran, R, C++, and so on and so forth. And this is an observational method where you observe something that's happening, you get data out of it, you do a certain level of statistics to it. When I say statistics, I mean mean, mode, average, and so on and so forth, right? And what you do here in quantitative research is you perform your experiments on a smaller uh, on a smaller group, on a smaller sample space, and with that you can generalize it to a larger population, right? So it's for example, if I'm in a city, say Bangalore, I perform a survey for just Indranagar, where I stay, right? But with those results, I can generalize everything that would apply to entire Bangalore, which of course may or may not be correct, but that's what research is all about. And all the subjects that employ this kind of research are physics, biology, computer science, finance, right? You see the stock market of India, and then you can figure out how the world economy is working, and so on and so forth. And of course, medical research, where in one hospital they're doing some sort of a research, and they get something out of it. So wherever you have a similar scenario, the results that were obtained in this particular hospital in a small area can be translated to the larger field over there, right? So this was quantitative method of research. Now the next is the characteristics of research, right? I mean, what do you look for when you're doing research? I mean, what kind of things are you looking for? What kind of things are you doing? So on and so forth. The first one is of course empirical, where you see something and then you try to write down a formula for it, or you try to write down some theory for it, right? So these are empirical empirical research is basically based on experiments, right? You do an experiment and then you try to make something that would fit the experiment. And from physics, again, the best example that I can think of is from nuclear physics. If you've heard of the semi-empirical mass formula, it is based off of this, where they observed something and then they put down a formula for it, and that formula works pretty well for all the elements of the periodic table, and so on. The next is logical. This you will find majorly in mathematical sciences, right? Where where you're dealing with pure math primarily, where you make your deductions, you make your hypothesis based on logic and principles that have already been there, right? So, for example, I say 1 + 1 is 2. You say by logic 2 + 1 is going to be 3 because I'm adding 1 to every number, and that means I go to the next number on the number line, right? And the next is cyclic, where you start with a question and then you end with a question, which means there's always more to go about. And the next one is controlled. You'll find this in qualitative types of research, where only some variables are allowed to change. I won't get into the details of this. The next is hypothesis. You're always expected to get an hypothesis for your experiment as to what exactly are you trying to say, or what exactly are you trying to prove, right? And so it's an assumption which, after your research, you try to either prove or disprove, both of which are valid results of your research, right? And the next is analytical, which is the most obvious one, where you take data, you analyze it, you reduce the errors, and then you expect some data, and that's how you calculate your errors and then see what you get out of it. The objective and statistical ones, again, are quite trivial, where statistical is where you use the rules of statistics to analyze your data, which is quite similar to analytical. And objective is where you sort of try to guess something, you judge based on some parameters, and then you see what results you get, and then try to compare it with larger case scenarios and so on and so forth. Right? Okay. This finishes the first half of my talk, and the next half, like I said, will be about writing a research paper, right? So now, so far, we've learned about what exactly is research, what types of research are there, and what would you do. But then, how would you tell this to a larger crowd? Because this is you doing your work. But if someone, say, from your class wants to know what you're working on, how would you explain it to them? Or if you're going to a conference, how would you present it to a larger crowd there? Right? So writing a research paper is perhaps the most crucial thing for any student of any subject, be it arts or science or commerce, finances, whatever it is. Writing a research paper is perhaps the most important thing. But why do you write a research paper? Right? Like I said, it's the first primary purpose is to share your work, as to tell them what question was it that you asked, and what was your answer to it, and what have you learned out of it. And the next is the method or your explanation and the reasoning that you have used to arrive at the answer that you got from your particular research for your particular question. And of course, the next obvious question is, what exactly is a research paper? That's a very simple thing. It's just an essay, right? And a research paper is just an essay. But the only difference from a normal 10 marks essay that you would be used to writing in exams and a research paper is that this research paper is more scientific and is highly topic specific. And of course, it contains a lot of your personal analysis, your personal data, your simulations, your computations, your theory, your mathematical equations, your simplifications, your results, your discussions, and your conclusion. Right? The essay you wrote there was for 10 marks and in exams, and you just sort of put out your thoughts in a very general sense. But a research paper is highly specific. You deal with a very specific question in your mind, and you try to answer that question. You try to find something for it, and that's how you go about writing a research paper, right? So there are several types of papers, right? The most obvious ones, or the most common ones, is what I've mentioned here, which are book reviews. So, for example, if I'm reading a book on, say, condensed matter physics, I would like to write a review on that book. If I'm a person who studies condensed matter physics, then I want to tell people how this book is so that they can read my review and then decide if they want to purchase that book or not. So this way, they don't have to purchase that book beforehand and then realize that it's not for them. Right? Instead, they can read my review and then see if that suits their requirements, and then they can go ahead and buy the book. so on and so forth, right? And the next is conference materials. Like I said, if you go to conferences, then you need to present something, and there's a certain convention for how you're supposed to present, right? This, of course, includes posters that I've also mentioned a little below, but you also present your papers, your articles, or your journal publications, and so on and so forth. The next is data sets. So, in the world that we live in right now, especially in the world of astrophysics or particle physics, if you've heard of the CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, or the James Webb Space Telescope, or the Event Horizon Telescope, all of these astrophysical processes, all these astrophysical uh, systems, right, produce a lot of data, right? So what these data sets are basically more cleaned version of that, so that and it's made open source, so that people all around the world can work with that data and then try to analyze the data, perform quantitative research on it, and then come up with their results, which is usually done in some sort of a collaboration around the world, right? And one of the best example for a data set is the one that included the black hole image that was recently published, right? That was a collaboration of several scientists around the world. The other that you might be familiar with is the gravitational waves that was discovered a few years ago. All of these are worldwide collaborations where data sets are released to all the scientific communities, and people work together to produce results that is acceptable by everyone. The next is letters and short reports. This is where you write letters to the journals or the journal editors, where these are sort of very precise and sort of suggestions or comments on something that have already been done. Uh, which brings me to the next type, which are articles, because these are the next things that you find in a journal. And these articles can be briefly of three types: research articles, review articles, and software tool articles. The most obvious and the most common ones that you read are mostly research articles, right? If you were to go to, say, material sciences, you will only find research articles because there's a lot of active research that's going on to uh, sort of better our daily use materials like solar films, or solar cells, uh, batteries, and so on and so forth, right? So research articles are your summaries uh, of the research that you have performed, be it qualitative or quantitative. We're not going to get into that, but we're going to talk about research in the general sense. These are summaries of the work that you have done. There's, of course, a certain amount of convention to it, where you talk about what sections are you putting in your research paper. I will get to that in a few minutes. So research articles, of course, are the most obvious ones, the most trivial ones that you will find, and these are the ones that are published primarily in journals. The next is review articles, where you review a particular topic. Right? For example, I work in multiscalar quantum field theories. So if I was to write a review article, what I would do is I would dig up all the resources that I have available on multiscalar quantum field theories. I would read all of them, and I would put in my own summary to it, right? But then what makes a review article so unique so as to publish in a journal is that you include your understanding of your personal views into it, because multiscalar QFT is the topic that I am working on, is already out there, right? So why would someone publish just a summary of everything that is out there? The reason is because it includes your own understanding to it. So next time someone asks you to write a review paper or a review article, please make sure that you keep in mind that your personal views and your personal understanding has to go into it. Your ideas of what could be done next, or what happens, or a particular phenomena, your ideas should also be included in your review paper, right? And what do you hope to do next after reviewing the topic that you've been working on so far? Do you wish to pursue that into a research article? Do you want to just stop it there, or something like that, right? And the last one, of course, is software tool articles, where the best example I can give you is publications of several Python modules. The most recent one that I remember reading was a paper on Einstein Pi, which is a package that helps make general relativity available on Python in a much easier sense, right? So this software tool article basically summarizes about a software that is being used in general public, right? So if someone wants to use Einstein Pi and they want to understand how to use it or what is it about, they would come back and read this paper or this article on Einstein Pi that has been published, and that will give them a very good idea of what Einstein Pi, the particular library, is all about. for example, if you're from biological sciences, then a paper on R, the software R, uh, that will help you understand what R is, how does it work, and how do you get started with it, and where else can you find resources? What other resources can you find? All of that will be summarized in something called a software tool article, which will help you sort of narrow down your time. I mean, save your time and narrow down your search for different resources, right? So these are the most standard things. And like I said, there's a certain convention that has been followed by people, by scientists or the scientific community all around the world, which is the first steps of writing a research paper. Now, I have put down 6 steps here because this is what I follow. But then you will find, of course, several other resources which maybe produce 9 steps or 6 steps or 5 steps or 3 steps, so on and so forth. All of them essentially talk about the same thing. So what I'm about to tell you from now on is is mostly my understanding. So what I'm presenting to you right now is a review of a sense, right? It's not a research related thing. I mean, it's not original, but it's not completely copied as well. So it's in between, and hence a review. So what I'm presenting to you is a review presentation, if you want to put it that way, right? So here are the 6 steps. The first step, of course, the most obvious one, is you fix your area of study. That's the most trivial, right? You need to know what you want to work on, right? Now, just saying I want to work on physics isn't enough, because in physics there's a lot of things, right? There's material sciences, condensed matter physics, there's solid state, there's astronomy, there's astrophysics, string theory, quantum gravity, so on and so forth. There's like a lot of them. Or if you were to pick computational sciences, you should pick what exactly do you want to do you want to work on algorithms? Do you want to actually build a new function, or something like that, right? So the first is fixing your area of study. So you want to narrow it down to as much as you can. I'll go ahead with my current example, my current research. Um, just like I said, just saying I want to study physics isn't enough, or just saying I want to study theoretical physics also isn't enough, because even in that there's several subdivisions. So what I say is that my area of study is going to be something called quantum field theory. That is something that I assign to myself, right? And hence the assignment. This is where you assign yourself the area of study. The next is finding the topic. Right now, just saying quantum field theories again isn't enough for me, because in quantum field theories there's a lot of research topics, right? So I need to figure out what exactly do I want to work on, and this is as precise as I get to my research problem, my research statement, right? And hence I call it the problem statement. Finding a problem statement for a beginner researcher is the step that takes maximum amount of time, or maybe the first maximum amount of time, because there's a lot of options out there, there's a lot of resources out there. And so about the first two topics, fixing the area of study and the topic, they include a lot of reading. You have to read a lot of resources, and the best way that I tell my students always is to start off with the Wikipedia page, right? You open the Wikipedia page, something that you like. So I'll open the Wikipedia page of quantum field theory, and then I'll read the Wikipedia page, and then I'll come down, right? I'll come down to the references section, and then I'll see if there's something good there, right? And then I pick up some paper and I start reading, and then if that's good enough, I'll continue. Otherwise, I'll come back and then find something else to read, right? Because Wikipedia already is a summary of everything, so I don't have to go about searching every single paper on QFT, because everything is summarized on Wikipedia for me, which is a very good thing, right? So I'll start off with the Wikipedia page. I'll go to the reference section. I'll find something there, and then I start reading. I start reading more articles on Wikipedia. I start reading more research papers or more review papers, and so on and so forth. And this has to happen for quite a long time. There's no fixed timeline for it, but it depends on what you want to work on. But it is always advisable that you spend a good amount of time on this, because the problem statement that you pick will be something that you'll be spending the rest of your time in, right? So if you're in your final semester or something, which is about 3 to 4 months on an average, and you pick your problem statement in the first month, then this problem statement should be such that you're okay with spending the next 3 months on that problem statement, right? So you need to be very careful and very accurate about what problem statement are you picking. The next, of course, is the steps that you would take to perform or solve that problem or understand that problem. which is the plan of study and the conceptual approach that you would take. And all of this counts as the preliminary research, right? Of course, the finding the area of study and topic also counts as preliminary research, but all culminated together, I would call the third step to be the preliminary research, where you go back, read more stuff, and then you figure out how exactly do you go about solving your problem, right? And the next, of course, is collection of information and collection of data, whatever project you're working on, which is basically, again, for a project like mine on QFT, I would read more papers. But if you're working on a computational project, you collect data sets, and then you see what kind of software do you have to use, what libraries do you require, so on and so forth. If you're working in the biological or chemical sciences, then you perform your experiments and then you get the data out of them. Like if you're studying bacteria growth, you take readings for every 1 hour, 2 hours, or however you perform your research, right? And all of that counts as a statement. So this is what I have, and this is what I'm going to do with it, right? So the mix of the third and the fourth step is what comprises a statement. Now you have your research statement, like this is what I'm going to do, and this of course also includes the hypothesis, which kind of says that this is what I think is happening, or this is what I think will happen. And then you do your analysis, the data that you have, the information that you have, you work with it, you do your statistical analysis, you plot them out using softwares, you do the mathematical calculations, you wait for a bit more time, uh, all of that, and that will give you the outline of your research. Right now, the reason I've put another research right here is because you may have to go back and retrace your steps in case you've made some errors in between. All of this is done just to minimize the amount of errors that you get in your final results, right? And all of this again helps you prepare the outline of your final research paper. So by now, you know what your area of study is, you know what your topic is, you've done the required research, right? You've read through a lot of articles, you've read through a lot of lectures, papers, so on and so forth. You've collected a huge amount of data. You've analyzed the data. You've interpreted your results. Uh, and of course, when I say interpretation, it also involves some sort of discussion inside, right? Where you talk about what exactly do the results mean to you, right? So, for example, if I'm getting a formula out of my research on QFT, what exactly does that formula mean, right? So, if at the end I write E equals mc square is my result, what exactly does that mean? I need to be able to explain what that means, right? And then when you're presenting your result, you finally have your paper. So the paper happens to be the presentation of a result of your analysis and interpretation and research after you've collected all the information and data via a plan of study that you fixed for your particular topic in a vast field of study, right? So the underlined words or the phrases that I've put on the right side happen to be the uh, outcomes of each step. So the final is the paper, that is the final outcome, which includes by default the outline, a statement, the preliminary research, the problem statement, and the assignment that you've done given to yourself. Right. So these are the first steps of writing a research paper. And when I say the paper, again, it is very rare for in these days, at least, it's very rare to get your final paper at once. And therefore what you do is you start with your first draft, right? Because there's always several corrections that come in due to the conventions that I've told you. That convention changes from journal to journal, or guide to guide. Whoever you're working under, the lab or the professor, they have their thing. So in general, a first draft consists of your statement, your problem statement. It consists of different sections. The order in which you write those sections is not mandatory for now, right? Because this is a draft that you're putting up, right? So you can write you can write the analysis first, like what methods are you using first, and then you can write the introduction as to what exactly are you working on. Then you can put your graphical results, and in the end you can put your conclusion. But then based on your conclusion, you can again go back and modify your introduction or your abstract or anything of that sort. And hence I've mentioned several reiterations, right? You will be changing all of these. Sometimes you'll have to change the ordering of your sections to make logical flow or logical sense to it, and so on. And it goes without saying that you would, of course, write in paragraphs. But then there's a specific way, and this primarily is for the introduction paragraph that you write, the introduction section that you write. It is advisable that that it contains the four things that I've put there, which is the topic statement, which includes the idea of what you're working on, what your problem statement is, and then you mention what past work has already been done, right? So given the huge population that we have on our planet right now, any idea that you get, some other person would have already had it at the minimum, which means some already work would most possibly have already been done, right? Even if it's one research paper that has been published, something has already been done. And it is your duty, if you're working on on the same topic, it is your duty to make sure that you mention what past work has been done and cite that particular paper. I'll come back to citations and references towards the end. But yeah, so your introduction must contain evidences of past work that is related to your particular idea, and then you talk about more explanations, or if you want to give some examples or some analogies, you can go ahead with and put those, and then the conclusion. If it's a short review article, then in conclusion you say this is what we find, or you can say in the further sections, that is transition, in the further sections you're going to find this. In section 1 you're going to learn about the methodologies, in section 2 you'll see the graphical results, in section 3 you will see the mathematical results, and so on and so forth. So here's where you put a transition to the rest of the paper, right? So ideally it is advisable that you include all of these into your introduction section, and of course write them in paragraphs, right? Don't just write it as an essay where you just keep on typing continuously and don't leave any spaces in between, right? Uh, which brings us to what sections should be there in a paper. Now again, this is of course my understanding as to what and all should be there. This of course varies again from journal to journal and lab or professor that you're working with, but most of them will have these, where of course the most trivial one again is the title, which tells what the paper is all about, and then the abstract. Now the abstract is the number of words that you write for an abstract varies from again journal to journal, but ideally it's about 130 to 200 words, not more than that, unless it's a huge collaboration and you've done a lot of work. Ideally you would want to keep it under 200 words, right? And this abstract should tell what have you done in your entire paper, right? So this abstract is a summary of all the further sections that are put up, which means you start from your idea, and then you put in a little about what methods you've used, and then you put a little about what assumptions you have made, and then you put a little about what conclusions or what results have you got, right? So your abstract is supposed to contain all of these in ideally not more than 200 words, but of course you can exceed it if you want to. There's no fixed hard and fast rule for it. And the next are quite straightforward. The introduction, I've already mentioned what and all should introduction have. The next is literature review. That again is a part of introduction, but it's quite important that you do it, and hence I've put it as a different point here. Your next section can be a research methodology, which means you tell about what methods have you used. So, for example, if I'm using a particular theory, I will mention that. If you're using a particular algorithm to do your research, you mention that algorithm. Or if you're working with a lab and they work in a specific manner, you mention that research methodology, and so on and so forth. You show all your calculations here. You show your code if you want to, if you don't mind sharing your code with the rest of the world, and then the next section, of course, is the results, where you summarize the results of whatever you've done, right? So, for example, if I'm working on QFT, I'll mention a formula or an equation uh, that sort of is the result of my problem statement. Or if you're doing computation, then you would probably get a graph or a tree diagram or something like that. Or if you're working in chemical sciences, then maybe you received you found some unique stoichiometry or something like that, so on and so forth. So all of these will be summarized in the results, the result of the work that you have done. Okay, and the next is discussion. Now, what does those results mean, right? The work that I have done, the results that I've got, what sense do they make? I mean, what meaning do they give out, right? So this is what discussion section has. Usually they don't, people don't write it as a discussion section. The discussion part is by default included in the results section, right? But the next one, that is conclusion, that is always mentioned as a separate section, right? Primarily, where in conclusion you talk about what and all have you done, what have you achieved, what do your results signify, what are the limitations, and what future scope is there for your work, right? So if I'm working on string theory and I've gotten some result, what does that imply? What can I do with that result in string theory furthermore, right? Or where does my theory, where does my equation fail, right? If I go to smaller distances, maybe my equation fails, or if I go to longer distances, my equation fails, right? Or if you're doing biological sciences and you get something and you've done research in some particular temperature and pressure, right? So does your result depend on that particular temperature and pressure, does it or not? That is what is included in the discussion. And your limitations, you can say it may or may not depend on temperature and pressure. So the future scope is to see if the same results can be obtained at a different temperature and pressure, and see how repeatable is your experiment, and what are the circumstances, what are the varying parameters, and so on. All of this is included in the conclusion section, where you talk about your you give a good conclusion to your research, you talk about the limitations, and then you talk about what else can be done with your work in the future by someone else, or maybe by you as well, right? And the last one, of course, is the references section. This is the most important thing, again, because it is your duty as a student, as a researcher, to give credit to whoever, to the person you're using, as in the person's research you're using, right? Giving credits is again very important, and hence the reference section will have a list of all the papers that you've referred to. And here again, usually you don't talk about Wikipedia articles or anything of that sort, because Wikipedia article itself is a summary, right? So it's not advisable to put Wikipedia or some article on a website as your reference. Uh, what we mean usually by references are articles that are published in journals, or are published on websites like Archive or something like that, which are available open source and are actual scientific articles, and have uh, proper science in them, up and not these sci-fi stuff that you see on phys.org or anything. So if you're using this website called phys.org, which is a physics website again, you'll find an article, yes, but if you scroll down, you will see where that article was written from, or what is the reference for that article. It is usually a paper. That is the paper you refer to. That is the paper you put in your reference, right? And the same way, if you're reading something from Wikipedia and you pick a particular topic out of that, you would cite, or you would put that paper and reference that you've referred to, something that was published in a journal on some particular day and date in some page numbers, right, in some edition or something like that. And appendix is not usually done in research papers, but appendix is somewhere, is a place where you sort of give the keywords to your research paper, or your document. And people can just look at appendix and see if the particular keyword that they are looking for is there or not. Usually you don't find appendix in these research papers, but they're sometimes there if you have written a long book review, or a long review article. If it's a very long one, then yes, it's advisable to put an appendix, so that people can just look up keywords and not waste their time looking for a very specific word or a very specific topic, right? That's that. The next is publishing. You have done your work, but how do you get it out to the audience? That's where publishing comes in. Now, I'll have to admit that I haven't published any paper yet, right? But I have written a few articles, and hence I feel that I have a little bit experience in what goes into publishing. And the most obvious steps are, of course, finding where you want to publish, and then you prepare your paper according to the rules of that journal. Like I've been saying so far, there are conventions that are followed, and those conventions vary from journal to journal. Like for example, some journals would want you to have this particular font at this particular font size, and you should have two columns in your paper, and so on and so forth, right? You submit it, and then it is peer reviewed, which means that particular paper that you submit is reviewed by many people around the world, and they will send back suggestions if necessary, saying you've made this mistake, or there's a typo here, or this mathematical equation is not proper, or this graph isn't clear, or something like that. So you revise your paper and then you submit it again, and then that way you can track where your paper is, as in and at what stage it is, and all of that. And finally, it is published in a particular journal, and there you have your first publication. Right now, like finding a journal is a tricky business, and my suggestion would be to look at the impact factor. This definition of impact factor varies from journal to journal. Again, I haven't been able to find a very definitive source for it, but based on my several readings, I found out that impact factor is a formula. So if I was to find the impact factor of a journal in 2021, a journal's impact factor in the year 2021, then I see how has it performed in the previous years, right? So the way I calculate that is I see for a particular article, I see the number of citations for a particular article that is published in the previous year, that is 1920, right? I see the number of citations in my current year, that is 21, divided by the total number of articles that can be cited in that particular journal in that previous year, right? I've put 21 because we're still in 22. It's still fresh. 21 gives you a better understanding. And for an example, Nature is a very famous journal. Has in 2020 it produced an impact factor of about 50, which means you can try to figure out as to what that means. But again, it changes from journal to journal. So you can again go back and read more reviews about that particular journal that you wish to publish in. Uh, Now, I'm afraid I won't be able to answer several questions on publishing, but if anyone here has already published and has experience with it, please feel free to go ahead and answer if there's any questions that come up. Okay. Now, again, coming back to where would you find papers, where you can see the conventions and all of that. There are these famous online resources. The first one, the most obvious one, is archive.org, right, where you find a lot of research articles, and this is open source, so it's accessible to everyone all around the world. The next, pdfdrive.net. The reason I've put that website is because sometimes you would require textbooks that are not available in hard copy. So pdfdrive.net is a good source for that. The others, JSTOR and UI AdsAbs and so on, they just help you find more topic related papers. And as a very quick example, I work with astrophysics right now. So if I wanted, say, data from the Hubble Space Telescope, then I would look up the Hubble Legacy Archive, the HLA, or maybe I'd look up the catalogs, so on. Or if I wanted something from the SDSS, then I would go to this particular website. They have a certain data release, that is DR16, the 16th data release. I'll take whatever spectrometric data that I want from there, so on and so forth. This is a quick example as to how that would go on, right? And I think this brings us to our last slide, which is citations and references. Right now, I don't know if all of you noticed. Let me just go back to the very starting of my talk. I don't know if you noticed, but I've been putting numbers here. I put 1, I put 2, and then Wikipedia 3, and then there's a 4 here. And you'll find numbers. There's a 9 here next to this image, and there's a 8 next to this image here, and then you can see 5 and 6 to this image here, and so on. So these numbers that I've put in between my presentation, right, in between my slides and in between my text, or on the images or with the images, those are called citations, right? So there are two types. I mean, there's two parts to giving credit to a particular author or a particular article. The two parts to it. Part one is citation. The second part is reference, right? So citation is where you cite them. Where exactly have you used that particular thing, right? So for example, if I just go back, this image here, types of scientific paper. This is a paper. This is an image that I've used in between my presentation, somewhere in some slide, right? So here I cite this particular reference. I say number 9, right? So I'm citing the 9th reference here. Now I don't know what this is, right? I just say number 9, which means that in my reference section, if I go back to my reference section, I look up the 9th reference, and then I will understand that this 9th reference, whatever it is being used in this particular slide. Let me just see the slide number. On the top here, I can see that it's the 10th slide, right? So I will say that the 9th reference was used in the 10th slide as such. And the reason I could say that is because I have the citation number 9 here, right? So let me go back full screen. Similarly, if I was to come back to this this image that I have here, where did I take this image from? I cite that particular reference as the 8th one. So what I do is I go back to my reference section, which I've mentioned here, right? I go back to my references section, and then I see 8, that is mean 3. That will redirect me to that particular image. And similarly, like I said, types of scientific papers, that I will look up the 9th reference, and I will see that this 9th reference, which is types of scientific papers, is used in the 10th slide, that is over here, right? So that's how citations and references work. And I hope you've gotten a basic idea of it, of how do you cite and use them in your references. I'll come back to this. So let me just quickly mention what citations and references are. I'm close to the time as well. Citations is where the information comes from. So you direct to the source of information, whereas reference is the actual source, right? So another example here is in between a paper, I mention a line saying beavers have been shown to be discriminate eaters of hardwoods. Now, this is a statement that I will put maybe in the introduction section of my paper, right? And I just say number 1. So I scroll down to the reference section, and then I see that the citation number 1 was directing me to reference number 1, which is a paper by H.S. Crawford, R.G. Hooper, and R.F. Harlow. The title of the paper was Woody Plants Selected by Beavers in the Appalachian and Valley Province in Upper Darby, published in the US Department of Agriculture in the year 1976. Right? So this is what a reference has. It has the authors, it has the name of the paper, it has the journal usually, right? And the year of publication. And there's, of course, you can choose to include more information like the edition of the journal, the page number, which volume it was, and so on and so forth, which month was it published in, which year was it published in. But that's the primary difference between a citation and a reference. A citation is like a direction, right? It tells you where to go, and a reference is your destination, which tells you what exactly is your article, right? Or your review paper, or whatever it is, right? So let me just show you my references section. So you see whatever I've taken, I've put them in numbers. So if I'm using my first reference here, so what I do is, usually this happens in the other way around. I'm showing you my reference first and then going to the citation, but usually you look at the citation first and then come to the reference. But just for the sake of doing it, the first reference is some website, it's some blog, which talks about what is the research purpose of research. That's the name of the website. So I will go back all the way here, and you see this is the place where I've cited that reference. You see from the Code of Federal Regulations number 1, which means this particular statement that I have, research is a systematic, so on and so forth, generalizable knowledge, is taken from that first reference, which is a blog at the end here, which is a blog on Discover PhDs, right? So on and so forth. That's how you do your citations and references. And with this, I will conclude my talk for the day.
Hello.
Hi. Yes.
I want to know about impact factor formula. Like I didn't understood the denominator part.
Oh,
Can you
okay.
please explain it?
I'll try to explain it as I have understood it, but then of course I would highly recommend that you go back and read more about it, because like I said, I don't have enough experience in publishing. So the impact factor basically talks about how effective or how famous a journal is, to put it in layman's terms, how good a journal is. That's what an impact factor is all about. And how would you calculate? How is an impact factor usually calculated? Is let's say you're calculating the impact factor of a journal in the year 2021, right? How good was that journal in 2021, right? Because I'm in 22 right now, and I want to know, I want to publish in some paper. So I can't figure out what impact factor it has in this year because it's still going on, right? So I will look at the previous year. I will look at the results of the previous year, which is 2021, and to do that, to see how impactful this particular journal was, what I see is I pick some article on an average or something, and I will see how many times was it cited, right? Because this particular article that I'm looking at was published in this journal that I'm looking at, right? For example, let's just take Nature because the word is already there. Let's take Nature, right? I'm looking at an article in Nature that was published in the year 2019 to 20, somewhere there, right? Say maybe August 2019 or something like that. There was a paper published in Nature journal, right? So I will see how many times was it cited, and I'll note down that number. Then what I'll do is I will divide it by the total number of articles that Nature journal published in that particular year, right? So what that will tell me is in that year, I mean, in the year wherever August 2019 exists, which is the year 2019-20, right? So what that will tell me is this particular paper that was published in August 2019 in Nature journal was cited way more than how many ever articles it published, right? For example, if this was cited 100 times, this article was cited 100 times, but for example, say Nature published only 10 papers that year in their journal, then my impact factor would be 100 by 10, right? Which is an impact factor of 10, right? But vice versa, if I was to say pick some other journal, say let's call it a rough journal, okay? I have the word rough in front of me on my table. So let's say I'm looking at this journal called Rough Journal, and it has published 100 articles in the year 2019-20. But in August 2019, the article that I am looking for, which is in August 2019, let's say it was published here as well, was cited only 10 times, right? From this particular journal, it was cited only 10 times, but it published 100 articles. So then the impact factor would be 10 by 100, right? Because the article was cited 10 times, but it published 100 articles, different articles, right? So the impact factor would be 10 by 100, which is 0.1. That's a very bad impact factor. And you can see, right? If no one is citing from this journal, no one is aware of this journal, which means no one's going to read this journal, which means all the work that you've done, you cannot share it to a wider audience. Only 10 people would have read your paper, which is bad. I mean, how else are people to know what work you've done, right? And that's why it's an important thing to look at impact factor of journals wherever you wish to publish. Ideally, you can pick that, and otherwise also which journals are good because you've been hearing about them for quite a while, right? So if you're in India, the Indian Academy of Sciences publishes quite a lot of journals, right? The physics one is called Resonance, I think it's called Resonance. The science one is called Resonance. The physics one is called Pramana. There's one for astronomy and astrophysics. All of these are good journals because you hear about them, people cite them, the Indian researchers cite from them, and so on and so forth. Nature, on the other hand, is a worldwide journal, right? So it has a higher impact factor, but that doesn't mean that they're bad or they're very good or something. It just depends on what are they looking for, right? So each journal has their own set of rules for what they look in a research paper in order for them to publish it. They're very picky in these days. In the olden days, at the time of Einstein or Planck or someone, they were not so choosy. But now, since the number of people have increased and the number of research articles that you get every single day is in the order of hundreds, if not thousands, they have to be very picky of what they'll publish and what they'll not in order to maintain their reputation as well. There's a lot of that, but that's what impact factor tells you in a very general sense.
Sir,
Yeah, go ahead.
sir, does the impact factor also depend on whether a journal is a paid journal or an unpaid journal?
Sometimes yes, but then I'm pretty sure of ways of accessing paid content as well. So in the current scenario, although it does impact, I mean, people have been fighting for open source stuff. up to a certain extent, it does depend on if the journal is paid or not. And I'm not entirely sure, but I think you also have to pay the journals if they want to publish. I mean, if you want them to publish your paper. I'm not entirely sure of that. If someone here has already had experience with publishing, they can please pitch in. But otherwise, again, this is a very detailed discussion about publishing itself.
And sir, does if I get a paper published in a paid journal, will it hold lesser value than an
No, not
unpaid
at,
journal?
see, getting it published in any journal is a good thing, right?
Yes.
Because it doesn't matter, because what matters is that you have it published somewhere, right? So the thing is, when you're doing research, your primary goal should be the fact that you get it out there first, right? So that whatever happens next, you get the credits of starting it, or you get the credits for the first one, right? For the first one to start about it. So for example, the best example is perhaps special relativity that was put forth by Albert Einstein. Now special relativity is basically using Lorentz transformations, if you're familiar with it. If not, that's okay. These Lorentz transformations, on the other hand, were already published way before Einstein came in and gave a special relativity. So, in a sense, if you actually read the papers, special relativity was just a summary of Lorentz transformations and electrodynamics. Okay, whereas Lorentz transformations were already published before, and that's why we call them Lorentz transformations, because Heinrich Lorentz, was the first one who published those rules of transformation, and hence the name stuck up, Lorentz transformations, right? But for GR, Einstein is the first one who got it out there. There were other people working on relativistic stuff, but Einstein was the first one to publish it, and hence the credit goes to Einstein. Same with photoelectric effect. Einstein was the first one to publish it, and hence he got the Nobel Prize. There were other people working on it, but he published his results first, right? So the whole idea of publishing is to go out there first and make sure that you let the world know that I've already done this, so that later if someone does the exact same thing and you already have your work out there on archive or something, you can tell that, hey, this, I've already done this, and yours is just a copy of mine. So in that way you avoid plagiarism, right? You avoid your plagiarism, and this is why peer reviewed journals are the best ones, because when we say peer reviewed, it is basically another researcher reading your research work and seeing if it makes sense, seeing if it's not plagiarized or stuff like that, right? Almost all the journals we have right now are peer reviewed, and it doesn't decrease value in any way, so you don't have to worry about that. But just be a little careful about where you choose to publish, right? I mean, if you know that a journal is bad, don't go to publish there, because then you won't have your paper won't reach out to a wider audience, right? The
And that
idea
we
is,
would know by seeing the impact factor, right?
by the impact factor, you can read reviews of the journals. Several other
Mm.
people have put reviews of the journals. You can read what types of articles does the journal publish.
Yes,
You
sir.
can see the publishing company, right? You can see
Yes.
that. There's several other parameters that you can look at. Impact
So,
factor
sir,
is just,
I'm currently a master's student and I am interested in getting a paper published during my master's itself.
Mhm.
But since I'm not really familiar with like a lot of knowledge, like the knowledge in the papers, when I'm reading the papers, the knowledge is too much in depth, and that is not included in our course structure as as
Right,
yet. So
right.
I'm done with the selection of the title, but when I'm reading the papers, there are terms that I don't get, and I'm not able to understand those terms. So I
Yeah,
don't really
yeah.
understand being
I
a
think.
master student.
Oh, don't worry about that. Don't worry about being a master student, because I know exactly what you're feeling, what you're going through. I myself am a master student, and I know what you're going through. So I'm assuming there are other people with a similar question. The whole idea is just you go back and read more about that particular word, right? So for example, you encounter a word that is not familiar to you at all, you go back, type it on Google, read up a Wikipedia page or some other article that is written on that word or on that topic, and then you come back, read the paper. You can at the max maybe read another line, and then you encounter some other word, so you go back, search for that word again, read something more, and then come back to this. So that's why reading one research paper takes a lot of time if you're a newbie.
Yes, sir.
Reading one paper really takes a lot of time. I'm sorry, where did you say you were from, Zainab?
Sir, I'm from Jamia Millia Islamia.
Okay, okay. So I'll just stop that here for now. If you have further questions, please reach out to me. I'll leave the email address here. Let me see if I can zoom in. Yeah, my email address is on the screen. I hope you can see it. You can reach out to me on any of those, and I will get back to you at the earliest. Any questions that you have or anything of that sort, you can reach out to me there. Okay. Let me see. Are there any other questions?
Hello.
Yes, Uncle.
Uh, someone was asking about the journal.
Mhm.
If someone is interested, like giving your article for a journal, I may suggest for JAPS, that is International Association of Physics Student, and if someone want to send the article, that is free for JAPS. If someone is interested,
Right.
I
Perhaps
can
you
give a
can put
link.
that on the chat box so that people here can go through that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because openings of the articles for journal is open all over the year, so
Okay.
you can
That's nice.
publish. Yeah.
That's nice. That's nice. Okay. Any other questions? I'm sorry. Let me just see the chat box. Let me scroll up. Okay. Okay. Kaushik, you can perhaps email me on the first email address, the one that ends with sjc.ac.in if you're here, and we can get in touch there. Okay, I see there's 3 questions from Abhilash Babu. Do you think the statistical analysis is being overemphasized in scientific research, writing, and publications? Okay, I'll try to briefly answer that question. Abhilash, you're here, right? And so that you can hear the answer.
Yeah, I'm hearing.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
So
hearing.
the reason we emphasize on statistical analysis is because that is something that everyone will agree upon, right? In a very general sense, all the mathematics that you do is something that everyone agrees upon, rather than just giving out a qualitative statement, right? So, for example, if I just do a survey of how many people like masala dosa in Indranagar, I can just say like these many people like it, right? But there's no evidence to it. Whereas research is all about providing evidences. Like, what is the base? What is the foundation for your claim? How can you say that people like masala dosa in Indranagar, or majority of the people like masala dosa in Indranagar? Because I might be one of those people who doesn't like masala dosa, right? So that in that sense, I would be an immediate contradiction to your research, and your entire research is gone. Because if you have done your 10th standard mathematics, you would have heard of proof by contradiction or proof by counter example, right? So if I am the counter example to your research, then immediately your research is flawed. It's gone, right? And that is why you provide statistics to your claim. Now, if you say people in Indra, majority of the people in Indranagar like masala dosa, you tell how many people did you ask, how many people said this answer, how many said no to it, right? You provide that statistics. You sort of do a distribution, and with that you conclude that we see that majority of the people in Indranagar like masala dosa, and hence the claim that I had is hence proved, right? That's why statistical analysis, I mean, this was a very simple example. If you look at particle physics, what you get there are basically just some random signals, right? You don't even know if particles are actually out there. But then when you do your statistical analysis, that's when you realize that if the particle is actually there or not, right? The signals that you got was indeed produced by a particle, and with that you tell with a certain level of confidence. If you've heard these talks by CERN, you would say that we have a phi sigma confidence, right? That is basically the standard deviation that you learn from statistical analysis, right? So all of those are, yes, very important in scientific research.
Okay.
Yeah. The next is, what are the differences between conference paper, journal paper, and book chapter? I think it's fairly straightforward. Conference paper is basically where you sort of display the work you've done by not revealing too much details, right? So if I was to place them in hierarchy, I would say a journal paper would be placed on top, from which you can write your conference paper, which would be a summary of the journal paper. And using the summary of the journal and the conference paper, you write a chapter in a book, right? Because a chapter is a very small part of a huge thing, whereas the journal paper is completely all about that. So what you do in your book chapter is you summarize whatever the journal paper is all about, or at least that's what I think. You can feel free to say otherwise. Okay, the next one. Do we need to change the procedure of material synthesis steps to avoid plagiarism while writing research papers? Okay, now I'm not entirely sure of this, right? But there are some things that you can't avoid. For example, when I say you can't avoid, I'm saying for plagiarism checks, right? So for example, if I'm working on say gravity, right, then it is inevitable that I use Newton's law of gravity, right? And if someone else is also working on say special relativity, and they are dealing with some sort of gravitational effects, then it is obvious that they would also use the same Newton's law of gravity, because Newton's law of gravity is same for everyone, right? So some things like that are unavoidable, but you can, there is a way to avoid that to a certain level, is you rephrase it differently, right? Your mathematical expression f equals gmm by r square might remain the same, but the way you put it in your paper can be phrased differently, right? So you can either explain it first and then put the equation, or you can put the equation first and then put the explanation, or you can change the notations, say small m is this, big M is that, G is this, so on and so forth. But there is a certain level that you cannot avoid, and that is okay. So a certain level of plagiarism is allowed everywhere, but again, there's that limit changes from place to place, so you have to be very careful about that. Okay, is there any other question? Can you please pardon the name of the astrophysics journal? Okay, I'm not entirely sure what you mean, Ritika. But the one by Indian Academy of Science is, I think, just called Astronomy and Astrophysics. I'm not entirely sure. We can check that right away, right? Let me just head over to Chrome, and then I'm going to say IAS Astronomy Journal. Yeah, Journal of Astrophysics and Astronomy. I think I have a little bit of slow internet. Right, so this is the one that is by the Indian Academy of Sciences. But otherwise, again, this is another research. Did you ask for astrophysics journal? Yes. So what I'll do is I'll just say astrophysics journals, right? I'll just Google for astrophysics journals, and then you see I have a bunch of journals that come up here. You can go through each of those and figure out which one do you like. Right? There's one by IOP, there's one by Elsevier, and then there's the Springer one, and then there's some Open Journal of Astrophysics, and then there's one by Indian Academy of Astrophysics, Indian Institute of Astrophysics, so on and so forth. So you can pick whichever you would like to, and this is like the first step to researching what journal you want. How is Resonance Journal? It's pretty good if you're interested in general science, because it includes scientific articles from all sciences. The physics journal from IAS is called Pramana, which I think they've stopped publishing hard copies, and they only publish online on their website here. Yes, here they say continuous article publication, which means they won't be printing books anymore. They'll only publish it on their website. But all of those will be authentic, which means you cannot plagiarize from them, because this still counts as a journal publication. Only the difference is they're not hard copy, they're soft copies. So yeah. Any other questions? Okay, let me just check that. So Sankalp Shinde on the chat box has put up jabs. So I'm just going to check that. Journal of IAPS. Yeah, so the interested ones can perhaps check it out. Right, if there's no further questions, I think this is a good time to stop. If you have any further questions, you can reach out to me on my email that is on the screen.
Thank you, Vikranth, for this wonderful session. I hope all your doubts are clear now. Yes. If there is any more doubts, you can unmute and ask or put in the chat box. If not, we'll end the session.
Right. I don't think there's further questions then.
Okay. So
Yep.
thank you everyone for joining and happy evening.